Welcome to our channel, English Lane, where you improve your spoken English every day with listening practice, knowledgeable content, and inspiring stories that help you grow. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our powerful and informative videos. Today, we bring you the inspiring life story of one of the most controversial and influential figures the world has ever seen, Saddam Hussein Abd al-Majid al-Tikriti. From his poor beginnings in a small, dusty village near Tikrit to his rise as one of the most feared and dominant leaders in the Arab world. This journey will not only help you understand history, but also improve your English, step by step, with every line you hear. So stay focused, listen carefully, and let's begin with his early life. Part 1. Early Life and the Making of Saddam Hussein. The story of Saddam Hussein begins in a dusty village called Al-Auja, near Tikrit, Iraq, in the year 1937. It was a small, poor village beside the great Tigris River, a land of sand, hardship, and pride. Saddam was born into poverty, in a world filled with tribal traditions and endless struggles. His father, Hussein Abd al-Majid, was a farmer who disappeared before Saddam was even born. Some say he died, others say he abandoned the family. Either way, Saddam grew up without a father, and that absence shaped his heart forever. His mother, Subha Tulfa al-Musallat, was left alone and broken. She tried to end her life while pregnant, but her brother Khairallah Tulfa stopped her. He would later play an important role in Saddam's life. Subha named her son Saddam, which means the one who confronts, and that name would soon define his destiny. As a child, Saddam lived in a mud house surrounded by poverty. There was no school, no electricity, and very little food. He often walked barefoot in the hot desert soil. Other children laughed at him for being poor, but Saddam grew up with a silent fire inside him, a desire to prove himself, to rise above them all. At the age of 10, Saddam left his mother's home and went to live with his uncle, Khairallah Tulfa, in Tikrit. Khairallah was a proud nationalist, deeply against British colonial influence in Iraq. He taught Saddam about Arab nationalism, history, and pride. He often told the boy, "Iraq must belong to Iraqis, not to foreigners." These words shaped Saddam's young mind. Under his uncle's care, Saddam learned to read and write. He studied stories of strong Arab leaders and dreamed of becoming one himself. He wanted respect. He wanted power. He wanted to be remembered. When Saddam was a teenager, he moved to Baghdad to continue his education. There he saw a new world, modern, crowded, and full of inequality. He noticed that some people lived in luxury, while others starved in the streets. He believed Iraq needed a strong leader, someone who could unite the people and fight corruption. He began to see himself in that role. In Baghdad, Saddam joined the Ba'ath Party, a movement that called for Arab unity, socialism, and freedom from foreign control. The Ba'ath Party was small, but passionate. They believed in strength, discipline, and power. Saddam quickly impressed his seniors with his determination and loyalty. He was quiet, but ruthless. By the age of 20, Saddam had already begun working secretly for the Ba'athists. He carried messages, planned meetings, and studied political strategies. He learned that politics was not about kindness, it was about control. He also learned how to silence enemies, how to plan in shadows, and how to build fear. In 1959, Saddam took part in a failed assassination attempt against Iraq's leader, Abdul Karim Qasim. The plan went wrong. Bullets were fired, chaos broke out, and Saddam was shot in the leg. He escaped through the river and fled to Syria and later to Egypt. There he lived in exile, but the experience made him stronger. He studied law at Cairo University, read books about Stalin and Nasser, and learned how dictators built power. He admired them, especially their control over people's minds and loyalty. When Saddam returned to Iraq in the mid-1960s, the political landscape had changed. The Ba'ath Party briefly came to power in 1963, then lost it, and then fought to regain control. During those years, Saddam worked silently in the background, building networks, eliminating rivals, and preparing for the day when he would rise. People who met him then described him as calm, calculating, and strangely confident. He never laughed loudly, never showed weakness, and always observed others before speaking. He believed that fear was more powerful than love. And in the world of Iraqi politics, fear kept people loyal. By 1968, the Ba'ath Party finally succeeded in taking full control of Iraq. This was the turning point. A military coup brought the party back to power, and Saddam, still in his early 30s, stood at the center of it all. He was not the top man yet. That position belonged to Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr, his cousin and mentor. But everyone inside the party could see that Saddam was the real force behind the scenes. He began restructuring the security services, controlling intelligence, and making sure every move was watched. He created a system where loyalty meant survival, and disobedience meant disappearance. Slowly, step by step, Saddam was building the foundation of absolute power. At home, he built his image as a humble son of Iraq, a man of the people. He often appeared wearing traditional clothes, visiting villages, shaking hands with farmers, and giving speeches about Arab pride. But behind the curtain, he was preparing for total control. By the late 1960s, Iraq was changing fast. Oil money was flowing, industries were growing, and Saddam was everywhere, signing orders, managing the economy, building schools, hospitals, and roads. People began to see him as the true leader, even before he officially became one. He loved the image of a strong, fearless man, the kind who never bowed to anyone. And that image, carefully built over years, would soon become the face of Iraq itself. The poor boy from Al-Auja had risen from nothing. He had no father, no wealth, no mercy, but he had ambition, discipline, and a dream of domination. And now, that dream was taking shape. This was the making of Saddam Hussein, the man who would soon take Iraq into an era of glory and terror. Part 2. Rise to Power and Becoming President. After the Ba'ath Party took control of Iraq in July 1968, the country stepped into a new era. Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr became the official president, but behind every major decision stood one man, Saddam Hussein. Though his title was only vice president, it was Saddam who truly ran the government. He was sharp, ambitious, and utterly focused on power. He began to expand his influence quietly. He studied every ministry, every officer, every rumor. Saddam understood that in Iraq, power was never secure. To survive, he had to control not just the army and the government, but also the hearts and minds of the people. He began building a vast network of loyalty and fear. He restructured Iraq's intelligence agencies, creating one of the most complex and feared systems in the Middle East. The Mukhabarat, the secret police, became his invisible army. They listened to conversations, followed families, and reported the smallest whispers. Nobody was beyond their reach. Saddam believed that fear was a tool. "If you cannot make them love you," he once said, "make them fear you." But Saddam also knew that power needed a public face. He carefully built his image as the protector of Iraq. Across the country, his portraits appeared on buildings, in schools, and in offices. He was shown as both a strong military commander and a kind father figure. On television, he smiled and shook hands with farmers and children. On posters, he appeared in heroic poses, wearing a gun on his hip, standing tall under the Iraqi flag. He became not just a leader, but a symbol, the face of a proud and united nation. In the 1970s, Iraq was changing fast. Oil revenues were flowing, and Saddam wanted to use them to modernize the country. New hospitals, schools, and roads were built. Literacy campaigns spread across villages. Electricity reached rural areas for the first time. To many Iraqis, life seemed to be improving, and Saddam appeared to be the man leading them toward a golden future. Yet behind the progress lay the darkness of control. Every book, every newspaper, every speech had to praise the president. Criticism was forbidden. Teachers taught history that glorified him. Even jokes about Saddam could cost a life. He made sure that no rival could grow powerful enough to threaten his position. By the mid-1970s, Saddam was already more powerful than the official president, Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr. Al-Bakr was old, tired, and increasingly dependent on Saddam. Saddam made key decisions, controlled the army, and had loyal men placed in every important position. He began to remove those he did not trust. Some were dismissed quietly, others were arrested, some were killed. In 1979, Saddam decided it was time. Al-Bakr was forced to resign, officially because of health reasons, but in truth, because Saddam wanted full control. On July 16, 1979, Saddam Hussein became the president of Iraq. Only days later, he called a meeting of top Ba'ath Party officials. Hundreds of men filled the hall. The meeting was filmed. On the stage, Saddam sat calmly, smoking a cigar. Then a nervous official began reading a list of names, men accused of plotting against the revolution. The atmosphere turned cold. Some men shouted their innocence, others began to cry. As each name was read, soldiers dragged the accused away. Saddam watched without emotion, occasionally nodding. Those who remained were later ordered to execute the condemned themselves. It was a chilling message. Loyalty was life. Betrayal was death. The 1979 purge showed Iraq and the world that Saddam ruled through fear. Absolute and unforgiving. After securing his position, Saddam turned again to development. He wanted to show that his rule could bring prosperity. Baghdad was filled with new buildings and monuments. Schools and universities were expanded. Women gained more opportunities in education and work. Iraq, for a brief moment, became one of the most advanced Arab nations. But this progress came at the price of freedom. Every achievement carried his name. Every success was his credit. He was no longer just Saddam. He was the revolution, the nation, and the future, all in one. Saddam saw himself as a new kind of Arab leader, the heir to Nasser, the voice of Arab unity. He dreamed of leading the Arab world. He presented himself as the defender of Arab pride and independence against Western interference. But his ambitions also led to paranoia. He trusted few people, not even his closest allies. He built multiple layers of security. each watching the other. He constantly changed his residence, never sleeping in the same place twice. He even used doubles, men who looked exactly like him, to attend public events in his place. In his private moments, Saddam watched recordings of his speeches and studied his gestures. He wanted perfection, to control not only his people, but his image, his voice, and even how history would remember him. He created a personality cult so powerful that many Iraqis began to see him as larger than life. Yet, behind this image of strength, Saddam's insecurities grew. He feared enemies both real and imagined. And beyond Iraq's borders, a storm was brewing. In 1979, the Islamic Revolution in Iran brought a new leader, Ayatollah Khomeini. Saddam feared that Khomeini's ideas could inspire Iraq's Shia majority to rise against his Sunni-led government. He saw Iran not just as a threat, but as an opportunity, an enemy that could unite Iraq behind him. He believed that a short, decisive war could strengthen his rule and make him the new hero of the Arab world. But that belief would soon lead Iraq into a tragedy that would last 8 long years and cost more than 1 million lives. As 1980 approached, Saddam stood at the peak of his power, feared, respected, and unstoppable. The people of Iraq believed their leader was invincible, but history was about to test him like never before. Part 3. The Iran-Iraq War and its aftermath. The year was 1980. Iraq stood under the firm hand of Saddam Hussein, a man who believed destiny had chosen him to shape the future of the Arab world. Across the border, Iran was trembling under a new revolution. Ayatollah Khomeini, the spiritual leader of Iran, had overthrown the Shah and established an Islamic republic. The old monarchy had fallen, and the region was changing faster than anyone could predict. To Saddam, this was both a threat and an opportunity. He feared that Khomeini's revolution could inspire Iraq's Shia majority to rebel against his Sunni-dominated regime. But he also saw Iran's chaos as a moment to strike, to weaken his historic rival, and to claim leadership of the Arab world. For Saddam, the time felt right. In September 1980, without a formal declaration, Iraqi forces crossed the border into Iran. The Iran-Iraq War had begun. Saddam announced to his people that Iraq was defending its honor, its borders, and the Arab nation itself. He promised a quick victory, believing that Iran's new government was too disorganized to fight back. At first, Iraqi troops advanced quickly. They captured several Iranian towns near the border, including the strategic city of Khorramshahr. Baghdad celebrated with fireworks, and Saddam appeared on television dressed in military uniform, smiling confidently. But what seemed like an easy war soon turned into a nightmare. Iran, under Khomeini's leadership, rallied its people with religious passion. Thousands of young volunteers, some barely teenagers, marched to the front, believing they were fighting a holy war. They chanted Allah Akbar as they charged into minefields and barbed wire. It was brutal, desperate, and endless. By 1982, Iran had regained much of its lost territory and began pushing deep into Iraq. The war turned into a bloody stalemate. Both sides launched human wave attacks, chemical weapons, and missile strikes. Cities were destroyed, villages emptied, and families shattered. The world watched in horror, but neither side would back down. Saddam now faced enormous pressure. Iraq's economy was bleeding. Billions of dollars were spent on weapons and supplies. The once thriving oil fields became battle zones. To keep the war going, Saddam turned to loans from neighboring Arab countries like Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. They supported him because they feared the spread of Iran's Islamic Revolution. The United States and other Western powers also began secretly aiding Iraq, providing intelligence and military materials. At home, Saddam tightened his grip even further. He portrayed the war as a battle for national survival. Every Iraqi man was expected to serve, every family to sacrifice. Propaganda flooded the airwaves, songs, posters, speeches, all praising Saddam as the brave commander defending the nation. Even when thousands died, their families were told to celebrate their martyrdom. In 1984, the War of the Cities began. Iraq and Iran started firing missiles at each other's capitals, Baghdad and Tehran. Civilians ran to shelters, listening to the constant sound of sirens and explosions. The world's attention turned to the horror of two nations destroying each other while the rest of the region stood by helplessly. Then came one of the darkest chapters, the use of chemical weapons. Saddam's forces began using mustard gas and nerve agents, first against Iranian troops, then against Kurdish civilians in northern Iraq. One of the most infamous attacks took place in Halabja in 1988, where thousands of innocent people, men, women, and children, were killed by poison gas. The images shocked the world, but inside Iraq, silence was enforced. No one dared speak against the government. Despite the devastation, Saddam never admitted weakness. He appeared in public, smiling, shaking hands with soldiers, and giving speeches of victory even when the truth was far different. He built monuments, printed new stamps, and awarded himself medals. His propaganda machine told the people that Iraq was winning, even as the front lines barely moved. By 1988, after 8 long years, both countries were exhausted. The war had claimed over 1 million lives, drained economies, and left entire generations scarred. Neither side had gained real victory. In August 1988, under the pressure of international mediation, Iraq and Iran finally accepted a ceasefire. When the guns fell silent, Saddam declared Iraq the victor. He organized massive parades in Baghdad. Soldiers marched through the streets as planes roared overhead. But beneath the celebration, the country was broken. Thousands of soldiers never returned. Families searched for the missing. The economy was in ruins. Iraq owed billions to its Arab allies, and unemployment was rising fast. Yet Saddam refused to accept reality. He told his people that Iraq's sacrifices had made it the true defender of Arab pride. He continued to build statues of himself, ordered new palaces, and planned huge reconstruction projects. He believed he had survived the greatest test of his leadership. But in truth, the war had weakened Iraq more than anyone realized. During the final years of the conflict, Saddam's distrust of everyone deepened. He suspected betrayal even within his inner circle. Many generals who had served faithfully were executed or dismissed. He kept records of every officer, every conversation, every whisper. His paranoia became a way of life. Meanwhile, the debt from the war began to crush Iraq's economy. Countries like Kuwait and Saudi Arabia demanded repayment, but Saddam felt they owed him gratitude instead. He believed Iraq had fought not only for itself, but for the entire Arab world, protecting them from Iran's revolution. When they refused to forgive his debts, Saddam grew furious. He began accusing Kuwait of economic warfare, of stealing oil, of betraying their Arab brotherhood. The war had ended, but Saddam's hunger for power and recognition had not. He wanted to rebuild Iraq as a mighty regional power once again. But the choices he made in the coming years would push the nation into even greater danger. The next conflict, the Gulf War, would not only shape Iraq's fate, but change the entire Middle East forever. Part 4. The Gulf War and the Years of Sanctions. By the late 1980s, Iraq was a nation standing on the edge of both pride and ruin. Saddam Hussein had declared victory in the Iran-Iraq War, but the price of that victory was devastating. 8 years of fighting had drained the country's economy, destroyed its infrastructure, and left hundreds of thousands of Iraqis dead or disabled. Still, Saddam saw himself as a hero, the man who had stopped the Iranian Revolution from spreading. He believed Iraq deserved respect, gratitude, and above all, power. But instead of wealth and glory, Saddam faced a new problem: debt. Iraq owed nearly $80 billion to its Arab neighbors, especially Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. Saddam believed those countries should cancel the debt, calling it the price Iraq had paid to defend them. When they refused, he became enraged. He accused Kuwait of stealing oil from Iraq's Rumaila oil field and of flooding the oil market to drive down prices, which hurt Iraq's fragile economy. In his speeches, Saddam began to paint Kuwait as an enemy of the Arab nation. He said Kuwait was part of Iraq's historical land, unjustly separated by colonial powers. His anger grew into a dangerous obsession. Advisors who warned him to avoid conflict were silenced. He believed the world would not interfere if Iraq acted decisively. On August 2, 1990, Iraqi tanks crossed the border into Kuwait. Within hours, the small nation was under Iraqi control. The invasion shocked the world. Saddam announced that Kuwait had been liberated and was now Iraq's 19th province. He declared it an act of justice, claiming he was correcting history. But the international community saw it as aggression. The United Nations demanded Iraq's withdrawal. The United States, under President George H.W. Bush, began building a massive coalition of countries to oppose Iraq. Troops from America, Britain, France, Saudi Arabia, and many others gathered in the Persian Gulf. It became clear that Saddam had underestimated the world's response. In Baghdad, Saddam refused to back down. He believed the coalition would not dare attack a Muslim nation. He even tried to appeal to Arab unity, calling for jihad against the Western forces. But most Arab governments joined the coalition instead, fearing Saddam more than they feared the West. As the deadline for Iraq's withdrawal approached, Saddam remained defiant. He gave long speeches on television vowing to fight to the last breath. He promised a mother of all battles if Iraq was attacked. His state media showed him surrounded by soldiers and children, smiling confidently. But inside his military there was confusion and fear. Iraq's army was large but exhausted, and no match for the advanced technology of the United States and its allies. On January 17, 1991, the war began. The coalition launched Operation Desert Storm, one of the most powerful air campaigns in history. For weeks, American and Allied aircraft bombed Iraqi military targets, communication centers, and even parts of Baghdad. The skies over Iraq were filled with fire and thunder. The world watched live on television as bombs lit up the night sky. Iraqi defenses crumbled quickly, soldiers deserted, communication lines broke, and fuel supplies ran out. The coalition's air power destroyed bridges, tanks, and radar systems with precision. Saddam's promises of victory began to sound hollow. In February, coalition ground forces entered Kuwait. Within just 100 hours, Iraqi troops were defeated and forced to retreat. The road from Kuwait City to Basra became a scene of horror. Hundreds of vehicles destroyed in what became known as the Highway of Death. On February 28, 1991, the Gulf War officially ended. Coalition forces had achieved their goal. Kuwait was free. But they stopped short of removing Saddam from power. President Bush decided not to invade Baghdad, fearing it would cause chaos in the region. Saddam remained in control, beaten but unbroken. However, Iraq was now isolated. The United Nations imposed strict sanctions, banning most trade and freezing Iraqi assets abroad. The sanctions aimed to force Saddam to give up his weapons of mass destruction and comply with international inspections. In reality, the sanctions devastated ordinary Iraqis. Food became scarce, hospitals ran out of medicine, and electricity failed for hours each day. The economy collapsed, and poverty spread across the nation. Saddam, meanwhile, used the suffering to strengthen his grip. He blamed the West for the hardships and portrayed himself as a victim of global injustice. His propaganda machine went into overdrive, showing images of starving children and destroyed homes, always with the message that Iraq's pain was the fault of America and its allies. Inside Iraq, rebellion brewed. In the South, Shia Muslims rose up against Saddam's rule, encouraged by the U.S. promise of support. In the North, the Kurds also rebelled, seeking independence. For a brief moment, it seemed Saddam's rule might end. But when the U.S. and coalition forces withdrew, Saddam's army returned with brutal force. Tens of thousands were killed in the uprisings, and entire towns were destroyed. The world watched, but did little. To control the Kurdish regions, the U.S. and allies established no-fly zones, preventing Iraqi planes from operating in the north and south. It limited Saddam's control, but it did not remove him. Year after year, he remained in power, defying the world. The 1990s became a decade of survival for Saddam Hussein. Iraq's infrastructure was in ruins, its people were hungry, and its isolation deepened. Yet Saddam continued to build palaces and monuments. He filled television broadcasts with his speeches and military parades, trying to show that he was still strong. He lived in luxury while his people suffered. UN inspectors entered Iraq to search for nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons. Saddam played a dangerous game, sometimes cooperating, sometimes obstructing. He allowed them to inspect some sites while hiding others. This cat-and-mouse game frustrated the international community and led to further airstrikes. By the late 1990s, Saddam's hold on power was absolute. Fear ruled Iraq. Every word against him could mean imprisonment or death. His sons, Uday and Qusay, became notorious for their cruelty. They lived in excess, above the law, spreading terror wherever they went. Yet despite his brutality, Saddam survived every crisis. Many Iraqis saw him as the only figure strong enough to keep the country united. Others hated him, but remained silent, knowing the price of opposition. The sanctions continued, the economy suffered, and Iraq slowly fell into despair. As the new century approached, Saddam's regime stood isolated but still alive. He believed the world would eventually tire of punishing Iraq. He thought he could outlast his enemies as he had always done before. But across the ocean in the United States, a new generation of leaders was already watching him closely, waiting for an excuse to finish what the Gulf War had left undone. Part 5. The Fall of Saddam Hussein, the 2003 Iraq War. By the beginning of the new millennium, Saddam Hussein had ruled Iraq for more than 2 decades. He had survived wars, uprisings, sanctions, and countless assassination attempts. To many Iraqis, he seemed untouchable, a man protected by fate itself. But outside Iraq, especially in the West, the image of Saddam had become darker and more dangerous than ever before. After the attacks of September 11, 2001, the world changed. The United States, under President George W. Bush, declared a global war on terror. Though Saddam had no proven link to the attacks, his name quickly returned to the headlines. American leaders accused him of possessing weapons of mass destruction, nuclear, chemical, and biological, and of threatening world peace. Saddam denied the claims, but few believed him. Inside Iraq, life was still difficult. The sanctions had turned once wealthy cities into shadows of their former selves. Electricity was unreliable, hospitals lacked basic supplies, and poverty was everywhere. Yet Saddam continued to build palaces, hold military parades, and appear on television as if nothing was wrong. His speeches grew more defiant. He claimed Iraq was strong, united, and ready to face any enemy. UN inspectors returned to Iraq in 2002 to search again for forbidden weapons. They visited factories, laboratories, and military sites, but found nothing conclusive. Saddam allowed them access, but often delayed or restricted their work. This behavior made the United States more suspicious. Behind closed doors, President Bush and his allies in Britain began preparing for war. They believed Saddam would never change, and that removing him was the only solution. In early 2003, American and British forces gathered in the Persian Gulf. Diplomacy continued at the United Nations, but the decision had already been made. Saddam refused to step down. He appeared on television, calm and confident, declaring that Iraq would fight and defeat any invasion. His ministers repeated his words, promising a new mother of all battles. On the night of March 19, 2003, Baghdad's skies lit up with fire. The United States launched Operation Iraqi Freedom. Cruise missiles and bombs rained down on the capital in what was called shock and awe. The explosions were visible for miles. Buildings shook, windows shattered, and the people of Baghdad watched in fear and disbelief. Saddam's army tried to resist, but it was no match for the advanced power of the coalition. Many Iraqi soldiers surrendered quickly, realizing the hopelessness of the fight. In some areas, entire divisions disappeared without firing a shot. Saddam remained defiant. He appeared briefly on state television, dressed in military uniform, holding a rifle, urging his people to fight. But as the coalition forces advanced from the south, city after city fell. By early April, American tanks had reached the outskirts of Baghdad. The regime began to crumble. On April 9, 2003, U.S. troops entered the capital. Crowds gathered in Firdos Square as an American tank pulled down a massive statue of Saddam Hussein. The moment was broadcast around the world. The image of the fallen statue became a symbol of the end of his rule. For Iraqis, it was a day filled with mixed emotions: relief, anger, fear, and uncertainty. But Saddam himself was gone. He had vanished just days before Baghdad fell. Some believed he was dead, others thought he had escaped abroad. In truth, he was moving from one safe house to another, protected by a small group of loyal followers. The once mighty leader was now a fugitive, hiding in the same kind of fear he had once created in others. In the months that followed, coalition forces searched relentlessly for him. They captured his sons, Uday and Qusay, after a fierce gun battle in Mosul. Both were killed, and their deaths were shown on television to prove that the old regime was truly gone. Still, Saddam remained hidden. Then, on December 13th, 2003, after months of searching, American forces finally found him. He was discovered in a small underground hideout near his hometown of Tikrit. The entrance was covered with dirt and debris. Inside, Saddam looked tired and unshaven, holding a pistol, but offering no resistance. One soldier described him as confused and disoriented, muttering that he was the president of Iraq. The once powerful dictator who had ruled with terror for decades was now captured without a single shot fired. News of his capture spread across the world within hours. Iraqis poured into the streets, some celebrating, some silent, others still in disbelief. The image of Saddam being examined by doctors, with his hair and beard disheveled, became a symbol of his downfall. The man who had built an empire of fear was now a prisoner in the hands of those he had once defied. After his capture, Saddam was held by American forces in a secret location. Over time, his trial began under the newly formed Iraqi government. The world watched as he sat in a courtroom, no longer a ruler, but an accused criminal. He was charged with crimes against humanity, including the massacre of hundreds of Shia villagers in the town of Dujail after an attempted assassination against him in 1982. During the trial, Saddam often shouted and argued with the judges. He called the court illegal and claimed he was still Iraq's legitimate president. Sometimes he laughed and recited verses from the Quran. Other times, he grew silent and appeared lost in thought. The once confident leader seemed trapped between pride and despair. The trial lasted for more than a year. Witnesses described torture, killings, and disappearances under his regime. Evidence was shown of mass graves, chemical attacks, and documents bearing his signature. The stories revealed the depth of the suffering Iraqis had endured during his rule. On November 5, 2006, Saddam Hussein was found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging. He remained calm as the verdict was read, shouting, "God is great," before being led away. His execution took place on December 30th, 2006, the first day of the Muslim festival Eid al-Adha. A few shaky videos of the moment later spread online, showing the final seconds of a man who had once commanded absolute power. With his death, an era ended, not only for Iraq, but for the entire Middle East. Yet his legacy continued to divide people. Some remembered him as a tyrant who destroyed lives and ruled through fear. Others, especially outside Iraq, saw him as a symbol of Arab defiance against the West. But for most Iraqis, his rule left behind pain, destruction, and deep scars that would take generations to heal. The country he once ruled with iron hands descended into chaos, civil war, terrorism, and sectarian violence. The shadow of Saddam Hussein remained long after his body was gone. And so, the man who rose from a poor village near Tikrit to become one of the most powerful and feared leaders in the world, ended his life in a dark cell, facing the judgment of history. His story stands as a reminder of how absolute power can rise, dominate, and ultimately destroy itself. Final part, Part 6, Legacy, Lessons, and What Learners Can Take from His Story. Saddam Hussein's life came to an end on December 30th, 2006, when he was executed by hanging in Baghdad after being found guilty of crimes against humanity. His death marked the end of an era of absolute power, fear, war, and control. But his story continues to echo through history, teaching us lessons about leadership, ambition, and the limits of power. Saddam Hussein's legacy is complex. To some, he was a hero who stood against Western domination and defended Arab pride. To others, he was a brutal dictator responsible for suffering, war, and countless deaths. History remembers him as both, a man who built and destroyed with the same hands, who dreamed of greatness but was consumed by the desire to control. From his rise in Tikrit to his fall in Baghdad, Saddam's life teaches one clear truth: power without justice cannot last. He built palaces, armies, and fear, but none could save him from the judgment of his own people. For English learners, his story offers more than history. It offers reflection. As you listen and learn, you not only practice the language, but also explore the choices, the emotions, and the lessons that shaped a nation. Through this story, you have learned new words, new expressions, and new ways of understanding context. But also, you have learned about human nature, the hunger for power, the cost of pride, and the tragedy of unchecked ambition. Saddam's life reminds us that leadership requires balance between strength and compassion, vision and humility. Without that balance, even the most powerful ruler can fall. From a poor boy in Tikrit who dreamed of greatness to a ruler feared by millions, Saddam's journey was one of extremes, of rise and ruin, of creation and destruction. But beyond politics, his life reveals something deeply human: the struggle to be remembered, to be significant, to leave a mark on history. And that is where your lesson begins. As a learner, every story you hear helps you build more than just language. It builds understanding. When you listen carefully, when you try to feel what the words mean, you grow not only in English, but also in wisdom. Saddam Hussein's story may be filled with darkness and power, but from that, we learn light, the value of humility, the importance of empathy, and the truth that no empire, no matter how strong, can stand forever. So as you finish this journey, remember, history is not just about what happened, but what we learn from it. And every time you listen, every time you repeat, every time you understand, you grow stronger. This was the life, the rise, and the fall of Saddam Hussein, a story of ambition, fear, power, and consequence. You've just completed one of the most powerful English listening practices on English Lane. Keep listening, keep learning, and keep growing. Because every story has a lesson, and every word brings you closer to mastery.